The wheels of the stagecoach groaned against the rocky trail as it descended into Millerville, a small outpost nestled along the southern edge of the Rocky Mountains. The year was 1873, and the air in these parts was thick with dust, secrets, and something sharper, survival. Smoke curled from chimneys of shanty cabins dotting the hillsides, mingling with the biting scent of dried sage and horse sweat. The sky above stretched endless and blue, unbroken by trees or towers, just miles of open land where God could see everything and the law didn't see enough. Inside the coach sat a woman wrapped in a faded wool shawl, hands gloved in old leather, holding a canvas bag stitched at the corners with care. Clara May, 38 years old, once the wife of a wheat farmer in Kansas, now a widow, a wanderer, and a soul looking for a place that would let her start again or let her die in peace. The bag held all she owned: 3 cotton dresses, her grandmother's weathered Bible, a tin of sewing needles, and a photograph so faded you could barely see the faces anymore. But she remembered them. Every wrinkle in her husband's brow, the curve of his smile before the fever took him, the smell of wheat and pipe smoke in their kitchen back in Abilene. The stage pulled to a halt with a hiss of brakes and the rattle of chains. Clara adjusted her bonnet and stepped out into the sunlight. The town was barely more than a scattering of buildings, a crooked saloon with stained windows and broken piano music leaking out, a blacksmith shop whose anvil rang with every strike, and a general store with a porch sagging under crates of dried goods and gossip. Children ran barefoot through the dirt, chased by dogs and the occasional warning shout from tired mothers. Clara's boots struck the ground with a dull thud. Dust rose around her hem like ghosts. She stood tall despite the ache in her back from 3 days of travel. Her eyes were sharp, clear, and betrayed none of the fear twisting in her gut. She knew what folks thought when they saw a woman like her alone, broken, desperate, easy to dismiss. A wiry man with a waxed mustache and a star pinned to his vest stepped forward. "Sheriff Dawson, you the one bound for Thorn Ridge?" "I am," Clara said, her voice steady, plain. He nodded, tipping his hat. "You sure about that? Lot of folks been up that way. None stayed long." "I've nowhere else to be," she said, and that was that. He pointed toward the hitching post. "Wagon'll take you as far as Carter's Ridge. After that, you're on your own. Thorn Ridge is up past the gulch, near the old miner's trail, 4 miles horseback, steep climb." Clara gave a small nod. "I can walk it." The sheriff grunted, impressed or amused, it was hard to tell. "Suit yourself." She boarded the wagon an hour later, sitting beside a quiet man who chewed tobacco and never once looked her in the eye. The trail out of Millerville rose into the hills, where cottonwoods whispered in the wind and the air grew cooler. Hawks circled overhead. Coyotes lurked just out of sight. The wagon left her at a wooden crossroad post with a faded sign. "Thorn Ridge, 4 mile." She walked. The trail was narrow and rutted, winding past dry creek beds and crumbling fence lines. Her boots kicked up gravel, her breath caught with each incline. The land here was hard, red, sun-baked earth, shrubs clawing their way out of the cracks. Nothing came easy. Clara paused once to drink from a flask of warm water, her hand trembling slightly as she wiped sweat from her brow. She reached the ranch just before dusk. It sat like a sentinel on the ridge, framed by wind-worn trees and endless sky. The house was 2 stories, made of aged timber, its shutters hanging askew. The front porch sagged in the middle. A weather vane spun lazily atop the barn. A split-rail fence wrapped around the fields, and beyond them, black cattle grazed in the dry grass, swishing their tails as the wind stirred. Clara climbed the steps and knocked once on the door. It opened slowly, revealing a man tall and lean, with a sun-leathered face, grizzled jaw, and blue eyes that had seen too much war and not enough peace. Eli Thatcher. He looked at her like a man looks at weather measuring, cautious, already expecting it to turn. "You're the new help?" he asked, voice low, quiet as gravel. "Yes," Clara replied. A pause, a moment stretched thin by tension. Then he stepped aside. "You'll sleep in the south room. Water's out back. We start at dawn." She entered without flinching. The door closed behind her with a heavy click. Outside, the last light of day bled into the horizon like an old wound, and the Rockies stood silent, watching. The south room smelled like dry wood, old sweat, and forgotten time. Clara set her bag gently on the iron frame bed, its springs creaking in protest. A single window looked out over the rear pasture, where the last embers of sunset painted the grass in burnt gold. There was no curtain, only a crooked rod where one used to hang. On the table stood a chipped basin and an oil lamp half filled. The floor bore marks of boots long gone, and cobwebs clung to corners like whispers of the past. She unpacked in silence, folding her dresses with care, setting the Bible on the nightstand, and placing the faded photograph beside it. Then she rolled up her sleeves and went to work. No one told her what to clean. No one had to. The house was large but hollow. Dust coated every surface: mantels, floorboards, windowsills. The kitchen was functional but cold. Pots were stacked with soot still inside. A lone wooden spoon rested in the sink like a forgotten soldier. She lit the stove, opened the windows, and scrubbed with a rhythm learned from years of hard living. By the time she washed her hands in the back trough, the sun was long gone. Coyotes howled in the distance. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls like a ghost warning her not to get comfortable. At dawn, she rose before the rooster did. Eli was already outside, feeding the horses. The corral was a wide fenced patch of churned earth beside the barn, where two bay mares snorted impatiently and stomped against the cold ground. Clara approached quietly, but not timidly. "You any good with feed?" Eli asked, tossing oats into a trough. "I used to run a farm," she answered. "That a yes?" "That's a yes." He handed her a pail and didn't speak again for the next hour. They worked in silence, save for the soft clinks of iron gates and the occasional grumble of cattle. Clara noted the efficiency in his movements: precise, practiced. A man who trusted animals more than people. She spent the morning repairing the chicken coop. Hens scattered as she patched holes in the wire, using spare planks from the barn. Her hands were calloused from Kansas soil, and by noon they bled anew. She welcomed it. Pain meant purpose. Later she found the garden. Overgrown, wild, and choking on weeds. Tomato cages sat rusted. Carrot beds had been overtaken by thistle. She knelt, hands plunging into the dry earth, pulling roots and thorns with steady determination. It was backbreaking work, but it reminded her of life: messy, painful, and worth the effort. When she returned to the house to clean the parlor, she found something that made her stop cold. On the mantel above the cold hearth was a book, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. She opened it gently, revealing delicate handwriting in the margins: notes, thoughts, emotions. Tucked inside was a flattened rose, its petals preserved, pressed between page 42 and 43, where the poem read, "I believe in you, my soul. The other I am must not abase itself to you." Clara stared at it for a long while. This house, this man, was not what it seemed. The chess set was next. Tucked away on a dusty side table near the window, the board was hand-carved, the pieces uneven but crafted with care. She noticed the queen was missing. Every other piece was intact: kings, bishops, pawns, all carefully arranged as if someone had played a game and never returned to finish. That night they ate in silence. The dining table, long and scarred, had seen better years. Eli served beans and cured ham. Clara didn't complain. Hunger makes kings of plain meals. He broke the silence. "You find the garden?" "I did." "Overrun?" "Yes, but salvageable." He nodded. "My mother used to keep it, before she passed." Clara paused. "She pressed roses?" Eli looked up, surprised. "You saw the book. It's beautiful," she said simply. He said nothing more, but something in his posture shifted. Less guarded, less stone. After dinner he poured 2 mugs of strong coffee and set up the chessboard. Without a word, he motioned for her to sit. She took the black side. "I don't have a queen," he muttered. "I've played worse hands." They played in quiet focus. Her moves were deliberate, cautious. His were blunt but thoughtful. It was a good match, 2 people who had lost too much to waste time on small talk. Before bed, Clara stepped onto the porch. The night was cool, moonlight casting silver across the ridgeline. The air smelled of cattle, pine, and distant rain. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hooted. She closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt still. It began with a stillness. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a shade too quiet, muted steel, like the color of a loaded gun before the trigger. The cattle huddled close to the fence line. The chickens refused to leave the coop. Even the wind, usually restless, held its breath. Clara looked up from the garden, dirt under her nails, weeds bundled at her feet. "It's coming," she whispered, wiping sweat from her brow. Eli stepped onto the porch, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes scanning the horizon. Monsoon out of the mountains. Could hit hard. She nodded. "What do you need?" He looked at her, weighing the question like it was more than just about weather. "Help me brace the barn." They worked fast. Together they lashed ropes across the barn doors, tied down loose tools, and herded the cattle closer to the southern wall for cover. Jake, the ranch hand, had ridden out that morning to check on the northern trail and wouldn't return before nightfall. Thunder cracked once, then again, closer. Rain came in thick sheets, falling like nails on the rooftop. The barn shuddered with each gust of wind. Clara's bonnet was soaked within minutes, and her dress clung to her legs as she shoveled hay toward the center stall. Lightning lit the rafters in white veins. Then came the sound, a sharp, panicked bellow. One of the cows was calving, and it was going badly. Clara rushed to the stall. The mother cow was down, side-heaving, eyes wide with strain. Her back legs kicked against the dirt, but nothing was moving. Eli stood at the threshold, frozen for a moment, rain dripping from his brim. "I don't," he started. "I do," Clara said firmly, dropping to her knees. She had seen it before. Back on their farm in Kansas. 5 years, 6 calvings. 2 went wrong. 1 nearly killed her husband. She wasn't about to let this one die. "Get me water," she barked, "and a blanket." Eli moved fast. No more hesitation. Clara rolled up her sleeves, whispered calming words to the animal, and slid her arms inside, fingers searching, heart pounding. The calf was turned. Breech. Wrong angle. She grit her teeth and adjusted it inch by inch, mud and blood slicking her arms. The cow moaned low, her body jerking. Thunder roared above them. "You're doing good, girl," Clara whispered. "Don't give up on me now." Eli returned with the blanket and bucket, eyes wide as he knelt beside her. "What can I do?" "Hold her steady. She's close." With one final heave, Clara pulled, and the calf slipped free, hitting the straw with a wet thud. It didn't move at first. For one terrifying second, the barn was silent except for the storm. Then it coughed twice and let out a tiny cry. Clara exhaled, shoulders sagging. She wiped her brow with the back of her arm, smearing mud across her cheek. Eli stared at her, stunned. "You saved it," he said, voice low, full of something unreadable. "She did most of the work," Clara replied, nodding at the exhausted mother. They worked together to dry the calf, rubbing it down with burlap sacks until it stood on wobbly legs. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the barn, a strange calm settled, like something old and bitter had finally taken a step back. After securing the doors one last time, they returned to the house soaked through and shivering. Clara stripped off her wet boots and stood by the stove, her teeth chattering. Eli tossed a dry towel her way. "Here." "Thank you," she said softly. "I haven't seen someone handle a calving like that since—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Clara didn't press. Instead, she poured 2 mugs of coffee, her hands still trembling slightly. They sat in silence, steam rising between them. "You didn't have to do that," he finally said. "I did." He studied her for a long time. Then, in a voice as quiet as the night, he added, "You're not like the others." She met his gaze. "Number I'm not." That night, Clara lay in bed listening to the storm fade into distant rumble. The smell of wet wood lingered in the walls. Her muscles ached. Her heart was strangely light. The land had tested her, and she had stood firm. Outside, in the barn, a newborn calf breathed softly beneath its mother's flank, and in the stillness of Thorn Ridge, something new had begun, fragile, like life, but growing. A week had passed since the storm, and Thorn Ridge breathed easier. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window as Clara kneaded biscuit dough, her sleeves rolled up and hands powdered in flour. Outside, the frost of early spring clung to the fence rails like a final echo of winter. The wind was lighter now, less biting, and the cattle no longer bunched nervously in corners. A newborn calf, one she had helped deliver, wobbled behind its mother, kicking playfully at tufts of prairie grass. Eli had begun leaving her short task notes by the coffee pot. Chores that once went unsaid were now written in firm, slanted handwriting. Check east fence line. Gather eggs. Refill water barrels. Clara understood this for what it was: trust, unspoken but real. She read them carefully, completing each with care. Every nailed plank, every turned soil, every repaired latch was a message. I'm staying. I belong. Jake Martinez returned that afternoon. His mustache was longer, his hat dustier, and his grin as crooked as ever. Heard you face that storm with nothing but spit and guts, he said, hopping off his horse with a chuckle. Mostly mud, Clara replied, wiping her hands. Jake was lean, mid-30s, half Mexican, and born with one leg shorter than the other. He walked with a permanent limp, but could rope a steer faster than most men with 2 even feet. He'd been Eli's only hand for years, and by now he treated the ranch like kin. Around the fire that evening, Jake told of a recent incident up near Buckeye Pass. 3 ranches hit in the last 2 weeks, he said, eyes narrowed over a tin mug. Someone's cutting fences, driving cattle out at night. Quick, organized, no one's been caught. Eli stared into the fire. Any signs? Fresh horseshoes, boot tracks, but they clean up fast. These boys know what they're doing. Clara felt a chill settle behind her ribs. Eli said nothing more, but the next morning he rode out early and didn't return until well after sunset. Clara waited, pacing between house and corral, watching the trail until his silhouette finally appeared against the fading light. His horse was lathered, his coat soaked in sweat. "Fence lines holding," he said, dismounting. "But someone's been watching us." Clara stiffened. "You saw them?" "Number, but they left behind tobacco ash by the ridge, fresh, and tracks not ours." That night, neither of them slept well. The next day, Clara checked the garden and found the gate unlatched. A minor thing, but she'd tied it closed the evening before. She glanced around, heart thudding, but saw no one. Just prairie, just silence. But silence could lie. By afternoon, she found herself at the shooting post behind the barn. A wooden stand with 5 tin cans balanced atop. She'd never fired much. Her husband had done most of the hunting, but now her hands itched to know how. She picked up one of the rifles. Heavy, worn grip, Eli's initials carved near the stock. "Finger off the trigger till you're ready," came a voice behind her. Eli stepped out of the shadows of the barn, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "I wasn't," she began. He raised a hand. "It's all right. I should have taught you sooner." He moved beside her, calm as a man reading a map. "Feet shoulder width. Lean forward a little. Grip firm but don't choke it. Squeeze, don't pull." She nodded. The first shot missed wide, kicking dust. The second clipped a can. The third sent it spinning. "Clara," smiled this beta herself. "You got grit," Eli muttered, then added quieter. "We might need it." By sundown, Jake returned from town with more news. "Sheriff Dawson says one of Thatcher's steers turned up butchered out near Dry Gulch. No branding iron, no hide, just meat stripped clean." Clara's throat tightened. "That's not just theft." "No," Jake said. "That's a warning." The wind picked up again that night. Not a storm, but something hungrier. It whistled through the trees like it carried voices. Clara sat by the window long after dark, watching the barn, the hills, the shifting shadows that might have been wind or might have been riders. At Thorn Ridge, danger no longer wore spurs or shouted through the front gate. It watched, it waited, and Clara May, once a farmer's wife and nothing more, found her fingers curling a little tighter around the grip of a rifle. The first shot rang out just past midnight. Clara sat up in bed before she was fully awake, her fingers clutching the quilt, heart pounding against her ribs. The sound echoed through the stillness like a bell in a graveyard, sharp, unnatural, and final. Another shot followed, then a muffled yell. She sprang from the bed and rushed to the window. The sky was dark, no moon, only stars veiled behind a high bank of clouds. But beyond the barn, in the fields near the east fence line, orange flickers licked the air. Fire. Controlled for now. Not from lightning. Not from carelessness. They're here. Clara grabbed her boots and pulled them on without stockings, the cold floor biting into her soles. She threw on her coat, snatched the rifle from behind the door, and ran into the yard. Jake met her halfway from the bunkhouse, revolver in hand, his shirt half-buttoned, breath steaming. "They're after the cattle," he said, already moving. 4 or 5 of them came through the north slope, past the creek, cut the fence clean. "Where's Ellie?" Clara asked. "He's got eyes on the herd. Told me to loop behind. You stick close to the barn." "I'm not hiding," she snapped. Jake grunted. "Didn't say you were." Then he vanished into the dark like a ghost with a limp. Clara took position behind the water trough near the barn. From there, she could see shadows shifting near the pasture riders dismounting, moving with purpose. She counted at least 3. One held a lantern, casting eerie light across the ground. Another dragged a rope across the fence post, readying to lead the cattle out. She took a breath. The rifle felt heavier tonight. Closer. She could hear boots crunching frostbitten grass, hear the snorts of nervous cows, the metallic jingle of bridles. Then a scream short, choked. A gunshot. "Jake?" She didn't wait. Clara stood, aimed and fired. The shot struck near the lantern, sending it flying. Flames burst across the dry grass, momentarily illuminating the chaos. One of the rustlers cursed and stumbled back. Another raised his pistol, scanning for the shooter. Clara ducked behind the trough as a bullet struck the wood near her head, splintering it with a loud crack. From the ridge above, a deeper boom rolled out Eli's rifle. It was a long shot, perfectly placed. One of the men dropped. The others shouted, scrambling for cover. Clara moved fast, darting toward the barn. Her breath burned in her chest. lungs fighting the freezing air. She reached the side wall just as another round whizzed past her shoulder. "I see her," one of the men yelled. "No, you don't," she thought. She reached into a bucket of lamp oil near the barn wall and dipped a rag. Wrapping it around a piece of fence wire, she struck a match and lit it. With a silent prayer, Clara threw the burning rag into a pile of dry hay beyond the grazing pen, well away from the animals. It caught fast. Flames leapt high, cracking and flaring, throwing shadows across the pasture like monstrous arms. The cattle panicked, stampeding toward the safer edge of the field. The rustlers scattered. From the tree line, Jake opened fire, forcing them further into disarray. One tried to mount his horse but caught a bullet in the thigh and screamed, tumbling down. Eli emerged from the ridge, calm and grim, his rifle raised. "Drop it," he barked to the last man standing. The rustler hesitated. Clara stepped out from the barn, rifle in both hands, mud on her boots, blood on her cheek from a grazing wound. Her eyes met the man's. "You're outnumbered," she said, steady as stone. He dropped his gun. When the sheriff arrived near dawn, he found the scene still smoldering. 2 rustlers tied to fence posts, another dead by the creek, and a burned patch of hay that had narrowly missed becoming a disaster. Sheriff Dawson tipped his hat to Clara. "Heard you lit the fire?" "I did," she said. "Hell of a move." She shrugged. "We had to protect what's ours." He looked to Eli, then Jake, then back to her. "You planning to stay long?" Clara didn't hesitate. "I already have." That morning, after the bodies were hauled away and the cattle calmed, Eli handed Clara a tin cup of coffee. His hands were scratched, his eyes exhausted, but his voice was soft. "I've never seen anyone think that fast," he said. "I've had practice," she replied. They sat beside the barn, watching smoke curl into the morning sky. Thorn Ridge had bled, but it had not broken. And Clara May, farmer's widow, storm survivor, and now protector, had found her place at last in its defense. The days that followed the raid passed not with celebration, but with steady hands and heavy shoulders. The burned hay was replaced first. Clara helped rake out the charred ground and spread new bales brought in from a nearby ranch. Eli worked beside her, barely saying a word, but his silence no longer felt cold. It felt shared. Every post they reset, every fence they restrung, was done as one like the land, and the bond between them was being rebuilt together. Jake had taken a grazing wound in the side, but he refused to rest. "Can't let the rustlers think we're limping," he'd grumble, tightening his belt above the bandage. Clara kept him well fed and occasionally tricked him into resting with warm cider and strong words. The sheriff came by twice, but there was little to report. The 2 surviving rustlers were locked in Millerville's tiny jail. The third, the one Eli shot, was buried near the creek, marked with a simple cross and no name. Eli insisted. "Every man deserves a grave," he said, quiet and firm. One afternoon, Clara found herself alone in the old garden again. The thaw had begun. The last frost was lifting from the earth, and beneath the dead vines, tiny shoots of green were breaking through. Clara knelt beside a row of carrots long overrun by wild grass. She dug in with bare fingers, clearing away the tangle, whispering to the soil like it could hear her. "Not dead, just buried," she said softly. Behind her, boots crunched on gravel. Eli stood there with 2 mugs of coffee, both steaming. He handed her one without a word and crouched beside her, watching her work. "My mother used to talk to the dirt too," he said. "She sounds wise." She was. He paused. "Before the war took all the words from our house." Clara looked at him. "And now?" Eli stared at the sprout in her hand. "They're coming back. Slowly." They sat in the dirt for a long while. Neither of them drank their coffee until it was cold. Later that week, Eli invited her to ride with him to the southern pasture. The morning was crisp and bright. Clara wore a borrowed hat and rode an old chestnut mare named Riddle. She hadn't been on horseback in years, but it came back like a lullaby. The saddle creaked with each step, the sun danced off the hills, and the breeze was cool against her face. Eli rode slightly ahead, his silhouette framed by the rising mountains. "Hard to believe this was all battlefield once," he said. Clara glanced at him. "You still see it that way?" "Sometimes." He looked at her, "but less now." They stopped at the ridge where you could see the full spread of Thorn Ridge below barn, house, pasture, garden. The wind tugged at Clara's hair. It looked whole, not perfect, but alive. "Why did you stay?" Eli asked. Clara didn't answer at first. Then, "Because I saw something worth staying for, and because I was tired of running from ghosts." He looked away, jaw tight, as if holding back more than just words. "I think," he said, voice low, I think this land might finally be ready for a second chance. She reached into her coat pocket and handed him something. A folded, faded photograph of her and her late husband, standing in front of a wheat field, smiling. He was a good man, Clara said, but he's not the only good man I've known. Eli stared at the photo, then handed it back. His fingers brushed hers rough, calloused, but warm. I'm not him, he said. I know, she replied. That's not what I'm looking for. They rode home in silence, but it was a silence filled with something new. That evening, Clara lit the oil lamp and found Eli sitting at the chessboard again. I whittled you a queen, he said, holding up a small wooden piece. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, a single rose carved into its base. Clara smiled. You remembered. I remember more than I let on. They played late into the night, and while no one said the word love, it hung in the air between them unspoken, but felt like the soil thawing beneath the frost, like the first bud after a long winter. Spring bloomed late in Montana territory. Snow still clung to the northern slopes like a warning, but Thorn Ridge was waking up. The apple trees behind the house had begun to bud, shy blossoms pressing through gray bark. Calves stumbled after mothers across open pasture. Birds nested under the barn eaves, chirping loudly like they owned the place. Inside the kitchen, Clara worked over a ledger, her fingers ink-stained, brow furrowed. Columns of numbers stretched down the page, neat and tight, each one representing a choice: fence posts, new tools, livestock feed, extra seed. Eli stood beside the stove, arms folded, watching her. You really trust me with the purse strings? She asked without looking up. You've earned more than that, he said. Besides, I hate math. She smirked and dipped the quill again. They were planning the future now out loud, on paper, in action. Clara had suggested expanding the breeding stock and hiring 2 extra hands before summer. Eli, ever cautious, took convincing. But he listened, and more importantly, he considered. By April's second week, they'd signed a contract with a cattle supplier out of Bozeman. Jake rode with the payment, Clara's tidy math and confident voice having won the terms. That night, Eli and Clara sat on the porch, mugs of coffee in hand, watching the last light settle across the land. You ever think you'd start over? He asked. Clara blew on her drink. I thought I was too tired, too old, too broken. And now, I feel planted, like something might actually grow again. Eli didn't respond right away. Then, slowly, he reached over and touched her hand. Just a touch, no words. She didn't pull away. The next morning, they walked the fields together. Eli showed her a dry gully near the west slope. We could build a dam here, he said. Create a reservoir, maybe even dig irrigation lines. Clara tilted her head. How long has that idea been stuck in your throat? Since before the war. She smiled. Let's dig. They started that afternoon. Clara shoveled alongside Eli, sweat beading at her temples, dirt smudging her shirt. It was hard work, unforgiving, like all honest labor, but it was good, and it was theirs. Jake returned 3 days later with the cattle, 2 ranch hands, and stories from town. They're talking about Thorn Ridge, he said, grinning. Say the ghost ranch came back to life. Sheriff Dawson asked if you were hiring deputies. Eli snorted. I'd rather hire a second rooster. But Clara saw something shift in him, a small, quiet pride. They hosted a supper that Sunday, just the 5 of them. Clara, Eli, Jake, and the 2 new hands. Will and Ezra, both young, eager, and full of questions. Clara cooked venison stew with cornbread, poured strong coffee, and for the first time since arriving, she laughed loudly, openly, with warmth that surprised even her. Will asked how she came to the ranch. I followed the dust and stayed for the fight, she said, raising her cup. That night, long after the others turned in, Eli lingered in the kitchen while Clara dried the dishes. You said once you were tired of running, he said. I was. I haven't run since the war, he said. But I stopped building, stopped hoping, until you showed up. Clara set down the cloth. Eli stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. He took her hand again, but this time, he didn't let go. I don't have much, he said. Just this land and my word. She met his eyes. That's more than most. He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket. A small silver ring, handmade, the band rough but honest. Inside, scratched with careful care, were the initials, C+E. Clara May, would you stay? Not just the work, not just the land. Stay with me. Clara didn't speak. She reached for the ring, turned it in her fingers, felt its weight not of silver, but of all they had survived. Yes, she whispered. And though no one else saw it, Thorn Ridge glowed that night beneath the stars, no longer haunted, no longer hollow, a home being born. The wedding was to be held beneath the apple trees. No preacher, no choir, no guests save for Jake, Will, Ezra, and a small calf that refused to be herded elsewhere. Clara stood in her Sunday dress, one she'd mended by hand the night before, and held a bouquet of wild lupine and sage picked from the hill behind the barn. Her hair was braided back with a ribbon Eli had once found tucked in a kitchen drawer, blue, frayed, familiar. Eli wore a clean shirt and the same boots he'd worn through war and storm. His hands, rough as ever, trembled slightly as he buttoned the collar. In his breast pocket, wrapped in cloth, was the silver ring he had carved under lamplight while Clara slept. They didn't rehearse vows. They didn't need to. When the moment came, Clara stepped forward and placed her hand in his. The trees above swayed gently, scattering white blossoms like snow. A breeze carried the scent of dust and distant pine. Jake stood off to the side, eyes misty. Will and Ezra stood still as fence posts. "I never dreamed of this," Clara said softly. "Neither did I," Eli replied. "But we built it anyway." He slipped the ring on her finger, and she smiled not just with her lips, but with her entire being. A smile born of ashes and hard earth and second chances. They kissed under open sky. No fanfare, no music. Just two hearts choosing each other on land that had once been silent and broken, now stitched together by sweat, soil, and a promise spoken without words. Thorn Ridge became Clara May Ranch that very day. And in the seasons that followed, good harvests, hard winters, wild colts, and quiet mornings, they never stopped rebuilding. Together,